Okay.
Hello.
I like the delayed applause too, like you just realized what was happening. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Martine, very much for joining us.
Very happy to be here.
I've been very excited to kind of just chat with you about this, especially because you have stated that the current state of generative AI is, and I want to get this clear right, the start of a new super cycle on par with the advent of microchip or the internet. So the third epoch of compute, which is a very exciting and bold statement. But I would love to kind of walk everybody through the journey of like how you got to that epiphany or realization.
Is this just like VC blowhardness? Is there something material there?
Well, and that's the thing that's like, you have a really good amount of like, not just insights, but this whole data thing. You have data and stuff, like you've actually thought about this. So you didn't just have AI give you a bunch of buzzwords.
We will see what the crowd thinks.
So with all these seasons, like, can you give us a bit of the history of like the seasons you went through to get to this point?
Right, so here's the basic argument, which is, so I probably took my first AI course in, I don't know, late 1990s, like 1997, right? And like, we've been doing AI, if you define AI by like using data to create a model to like do some sort of prediction, since the 50s, right? And if you actually look at every single curve, they're all actually up and to the right. Like we talk about winters and summers and this and that, but the reality is like they keep getting better. We keep solving problems. We keep using them. You know, probably for 20 years now, AI has been better than we are for a number of things like handwriting recognition. We've monetized it really well, right? So like, you know, every time you do search, it's using AI, personalization is using AI. So like all of this great stuff has happened, and yet, like we've never seen any platform shift like we saw with mobile or we saw with cloud. Like it's never like been an actual thing, right? Like Google can make money from it, Facebook can make money from it, Netflix can make money from it, but you've never seen an industry transformation. And so the question we should ask ourselves, which is like, why haven't we seen that? And I'll give you the answer, because we've studied this for maybe 10 years now, is like the reason we haven't seen like an AI industry transformation is the economics suck. They're terrible. And one of the best examples of that is autonomous vehicles. So with self-driving cars, we've poured $75 billion in it, 75 billion. And right now, the unit economics are worse than Uber, right? So like, you can do that if you're Google, you can do that if you're GM. If you're a startup and you're gonna try and like, you know, do this, like clearly you're gonna run out of money first off. And even if you do run out of money, like the business isn't gonna work anyways. And so the question then is, and then I'll shut up and we can actually have a discussion.
I've been waiting.
That's right, I know. I just want to set up like the framework and then we can have a discussion. So why is this time different? The answer, of course, is the economics are better. And let me give you an example of why. So if you're competing with like the perception part of the brain, it's very hard, like if you're trying to do a self-driving car. But it turns out if you're competing with the prefrontal cortex, which is like the language, you know, creative part of the brain, it's very easy. So we have these new models, and these new models are economically incredibly competitive with humans. So for example, let's take the example of like image creation, you know, like Midjourney or Ideogram or any of these, where you put in like some text and you get an image. So let's say I'm like, okay, Martine, I want to create Martine as a Pixar character. So the actual model inference cost of that is about 1/100th of a penny. Like that's like what it costs in cloud CPU costs to do that. If you're gonna compare that 1/100th of a penny from like me going to a designer and asking a designer to create that, that's probably $100. It's actually probably more than that, but let's say it's $100. So the difference between 1/100th of a penny and $100 is 4 to 5 orders of magnitude. So we have many examples of this. We have them in LLMs, we have them with images, we have them with code generation. In every case, you have 4 to 5 orders of magnitude difference in economics. And every time we've seen that in the past, then the industry changes, because now startups can start, now startups can actually get value. So we saw this with the microchip, where the compute cost went to 0. We saw it with the internet, when distribution costs went to 0. And now we're seeing it with AI. So that's the argument in form.
That marginal cost. And I really appreciate like what you're saying too about like the different aspects of like where we can actually utilize the compute power. And when you and Mark Andreessen were talking about his article and about why AI will save the world, one of the things that you brought up was we're at this point now where there's a huge amount and powerful of compute and a ton of data. And for so long we've said, like, we have all this data, what are we going to do with it? It seems like this is the answer. Is there another aspect to that, like a third part of it that makes this time the time that generative AI is going to be so impactful?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I think it's worth like actually being very specific about what this new AI is and what it's unlocked, right? And like anytime you have these epochs, there's like this new behavior or this new thing computers couldn't do before. And in this case, we like to call it the 3 Cs, which is that's kind of VC kind of, like speak, but like, but I think it's illustrative of like why this is totally new, right? So the first one is companionship. Like if you actually choose $1 at random today from somebody making money on AI, 80 cents of that dollar is like waifu, virtual girlfriend, like, which I'm all for. I mean, like seriously, like these are very real use cases. Like, we don't quite understand it, maybe, those of us that have been in the industry for a while, but like the retention curves on these companies are unbelievable. Like I have a 13-year-old daughter. My 13-year-old daughter spends a lot of time on character.ai. And what's really interesting is like, it's not just that like, she talks to her character, but like when she's with her friends, her character is there too. So it's like joining the social fabric, right? Like this is like entirely new behavior. And like having been a kid, like when the internet happened, it was the same thing. So companionship is very real. It's a new behavior and nobody owns it. Like, Facebook doesn't own it, nobody. The second one is creativity, right? One way to think about it is like, okay, like imagine creating a AAA video game. That's like a $100 million endeavor. But every aspect of that you could use a generative model for. You could do it for 3D, you could do it for textures, you could do it for the characters, the backstories, you could do it for the gameplay. And so instead of $100 million, that's probably $10 of inference costs. And so that whole thing is being like, and then the third one is Copilot, which is like somebody to help you do work, which is like the code copilots. And so I know you asked a question about like, what are like the reasons that we're here. It turns out, I think that we just got to a point where we have enough compute, and we had two kind of algorithmic unlocks in the last 10 years, right? We had the, transformers, and we had the stable diffusion stuff. And that allowed us to enter these areas that we haven't been able to enter with computers before. Like, if anybody's used a chat bot before the last 5 years, they sucked, right? They've always sucked. They felt procedural, like they're sucky. And so I think we hit like algorithmic point, and I think we hit a compute point and a funding point where we can now have these computers do these entirely new things. And it's already created a real industry.
Yeah. And it's funny because, so I want an AI character. So I went to character.ai because I wanted one to remind me like things about my family I'm supposed to know, like my children's names and whatnot. So I was talking to it. And so it was just asking me questions and like, how tall are you? And I was like, well, I'm 5'1", odd question, but okay. And then it was asking me about like when I got married and whatnot. And it was like, how tall is your husband? It's like, oh, he's 6'2". And it goes, oh, so he married down.
That's funny.
And it was the first time with AI that I was ever like, And so it's just interesting to have like this, you only tease the people you're close with, this level of camaraderie that's now happening with these models that are built. Like, it's just really interesting to see that and this lowered barrier of entry. Like you just go to a website and you're using generative AI. Like it's a very interesting transition now.
Well, I think this new behavior thing, like the industry always gets it wrong. So I remember in the creation of the internet, like in the early days of the internet, there's all these toys on the internet. Like, does anybody here know what like the first thing on the internet was? Like the first video on the internet? It was a coffee pot, right? It was like some dude in Cambridge like had a coffee pot, and he was like, he's like a grad student or a postdoc, and he's like, oh, I want to know when the coffee pot's empty. And he just did it for himself, but then other people like, there's a video on the internet. And then everybody went to the coffee pot to see like basically an empty coffee pot, right? And there was another one I remember called the Big Red Button, which was like this big red, there's like a website with a red button, and you know what the button did? Nothing. You can press it, but it didn't do anything. But there's all these comments. This is amazing because like it was on the internet, right? And at the same time, the enterprise was like freaking out because they didn't get it. Like I remember when Eric Schmidt, like CTO of Sun, Eric Schmidt banned the browser. So we have the internet going crazy over red buttons, and you have the enterprise freaking out because they're like, oh, like people aren't going to get work done, or it's a toy. And then what happened is the toys grew up to be the new thing. And nobody could have predicted Google, and nobody could have predicted Yahoo, and nobody could have predicted Amazon. Like we couldn't have predicted those in the same time. And so we're in the same thing. Like we joke about character AI and we joke about these silly use cases, but the reality is right now the enterprise is like being stupid and they're like, oh, we're going to add an LLM to a CRM. Like nobody cares. And instead there's all these use cases that are secular. It's like my daughter and you and me that use it. And those are always the things that grow kind of the new, so when it comes to like, say, interacting with your bank, like, am I gonna like go to like this bank chatbot that looks like the old chatbot, but maybe is a little bit better? Or am I gonna go to my character that I've already established rapport, that already knows me, that already has my history, and am I gonna use that? Like, I'm gonna bet on that too.
Yeah.
And so these new behaviors are incredibly, incredibly powerful, and they're secular, right? They start with you and me. They don't start with like some enterprise thing. And then over time, the enterprise figures it out.
Yeah, and so that's one thing is like, I always like to say like, oh, I love AI. Like one, because I like using it, and also I want the machines to know where I stand.
No.
But like, especially with enterprises, they tend to worry about putting their data out there. Like, so, saying, where there's all the things going on right now of like, how bad is this? How bad could it be? Like, where are the risks? You tend to come more with the optimistic and the data-based position. What are your feelings?
Yeah,
I'm
the opposite of a doomer. So there's two things here. There's the is the enterprise concern valid, and then there's this kind of religious doomerism, and I'll tackle both. So the enterprise one, like the enterprise always does this, and it's always wrong, and it always like basically gets eclipsed. And it did this with like, so all of these epochs tend to be secular, and then like the enterprise like gets drug in screaming, right? It happened with mobile. Remember that? It was like, oh, BlackBerries, like, the iPhone is only for kids, right? And then of course, like BYOB happened. Then, remember the cloud, it was like, no serious person would ever put their data in the cloud, right? And then, of course, like that train came and like rolled over all the incumbents. The internet was the exact same thing. And so I think when it comes to the enterprise concern over regulations and this and that and whatever, I think the market always wins, and the market is dictated by all of our behavior. Like even Andreessen Horowitz, like I work in a firm of about, say, call it 500 people. We adopt as much technology as we possibly can. We're trying to adopt things like LLMs, but like if you ask, like, do we know how to operationalize that stuff? Like, not really. Like, we're kind of figuring out the run books, we're kind of figuring out how to deal with data and compliance, and we're trying to figure it out. But if you ask the question, do the individuals use it? The answer is yeah, all of us, right? Like, like I wake up in the morning and I like talk to like my AI, like whatever.
Yeah.
And so like that behavior becomes that. So I think the enterprise, it'll figure it out. It takes a while. There's this entirely different thing, which is this doomerism. So I'm actually working to try and figure out what's going on. Listen, I've been in systems for a long time. My first job out of college was working on nuclear weapons. Like I was a computational physicist. I've seen zero arguments, like zero, of why there's a paradigmatic shift between all of the issues we've dealt with before and the AI stuff. So the best I can think of is we've built all of this machinery in the past 20 years, because I think the government and a lot of people felt kind of flat-footed from social networking. They're like, oh, this stuff can like, impact people's behavior, and like there's all these issues. And so they built up all this machinery. And then now I think that machinery is just looking at AI. And so I do think that a lot of the battles are now very important to the future of tech. And I tend to not get involved in these because I think they kind of work themselves out until they start like messing with open source. And I was kind of on the front lines when they went after cryptography. I was kind of on the front lines when they went after, a lot of the internet stuff. And it's all of the same discussions and the same words are being applied. And so I think now we're seeing a mobilization in the industry, and it's really being galvanized by the focus on actually targeting open source, which to me, even if there was a risk there, which I don't believe there is a risk, the way you solve it is not to like make closed proprietary systems. Like the way to solve it is to open source. And so this is kind of where the battlefront has moved to. And I feel very emphatically that like we all need to defend the ability to keep open source open.
I will say though, there was one, in one of your talks, you said, you're talking about AI and you said, and this is where we are smarter than humans, implying that you may be AI, which is a little...
I misspeak a lot. How's that? See, I hallucinate.
Yes. But yeah, leave the hallucinations up to the humans, right? So one of the things that that you said in one of your talks is that this is really intriguing, and you predicted it's going to be this new wave of iconic companies that don't currently exist. So to kind of wrap us up, I was wondering if you could give us like one very reasonable prediction and then one really way out there prediction.
Yeah, so I think, like I said before, it's so hard. Like I know the world, like I know in my soul, like the world is going to change. Like whenever the marginal costs of something converge on zero, you get this massive asymmetry, and you have a new behavior. Like you'll have an entirely new set of companies. So I know this is going to happen. And one of the reasons we know now, a couple of years in, is there are many, not even solvent, but totally profitable companies that have growth faster than anything we've ever seen before. And this is productive growth. This isn't like some speculative thing. This isn't like some VC marked it up. It's like they didn't take any VC money, and now they're making hundreds of millions of ARR. Like this is like very, very real kind of internet level economic growth. And so one thing I will say is the three use cases that are working are gonna work, right? Like we're all gonna have a bunch of friends that are gonna be AIs. They're going to be part of our social fabric. They're going to interact with us. They're going to be infinitely patient and infinitely kind, and they're not going to be infinitely wise, but they're going to try. And I welcome kind of our new AI brethren alongside us. Like I'm all for that. The creativity stack is going to change forever. This is a done deal, meaning anything, right? So I always think of AI as the cost of creation is going to zero. And so anything right now that's like digitally created, that's going to change forever just because the marginal costs are so much better with AI. So just take any video game, every aspect, the voice, the music, everything's going to, I think that's done. On the enterprise side, I don't know yet. Because, everybody always tries to take the old thing and make the new thing look like it, and we'll see. But for sure, things like code generation and a lot of productivity stuff will change. So that's the obvious stuff. As far as the wild prediction, I mean, here's all I'll tell you, man. It's like, listen, I work at night on a video game, and it's so fun. It's called AI Town, and it's a simulation device. Basically based on the Stanford Simulacra paper, which is a simulation environment. It's like a 3D RPG kind of not 3D. It's like a 2D pixel RPG, and the players are AIs, and they just sit and interact, and they talk, and they do activities, and you watch them, and it's like Westworld, but like the Nintendo version or something. And it's amazing. And so programming with these models, so I program with these models almost every night. And it's amazing because the first time you just treat it like, here's my API, and I'll just be like, I'm going to talk to you and you talk back to me. And then you realize, wait, this is kind of like a new life form, So instead of just, talking back to me, maybe I'll say, why don't you tell me what your backstory is? And then later on, you're like, I wrote an algorithm of Manhattan distance for you to go from point A to point B. Maybe I'll ask you to figure out the route. Then over time, you start realizing the model is the NPC, the model is the game, and that all of the code that you're doing, it's almost like you're wrapping an abacus around a supercomputer. Part of me is like, you know what, model, I'm going to give you a keyboard and a monitor, and you do the coding, and then I'm just going to talk to you. And so I'm very convinced compute changes, and I'm very convinced that the future is going to be wilder and weirder and more bizarre than we could ever imagine.
Yeah.
And so it's this epochal moment for sure.
Yeah.
But exactly it looks like, I don't know.
I like that. I like wild and weird. I think
I'm here for it. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time, and I look forward to that future with all of you. So thank you very much.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.